I had been traveling all day, my body heavy with exhaustion as I dragged my suitcase through the narrow halls of a small, almost empty hotel. It was late, well past midnight, and the silence was thick and unsettling. Every step I took seemed to echo louder than it should. When I finally reached my room, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if those four walls could protect me from the outside world. I locked the door behind me and threw my suitcase in the corner, too tired to even unpack. All I wanted was to sleep. The bed creaked as I collapsed onto it, but I didn't care. I was safe, or so I thought. The knock on the door came just as I was about to drift off. It was sharp, sudden, and it sent a jolt of fear through my body. I sat up, my heart racing, and checked the time. It was 2:13 a.m. Who could be knocking at this hour? For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, that maybe I was dreaming. But then it came again, louder this time. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was an emergency, something urgent. Maybe I had to evacuate the hotel. But why wouldn't they call my room instead of knocking? My hand hovered over the phone on the bedside table, but I didn't pick it up. Instead, I moved toward the door, trying to be as quiet as possible, hoping whoever it was would just go away. "Who is it?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and then a voice replied, calm and steady. "Hotel staff, sir. There's an issue that needs your attention." Something about the way they said it made my skin crawl. It was too calm, too rehearsed, like they had practiced those words 100 times. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the sweat starting to form on my forehead. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to open the door. But what if it really was an emergency? What if something was wrong? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was just being paranoid, overthinking because I was tired. But then I noticed something odd. The hallway outside was completely silent. No sounds of other guests, no footsteps, no voices. Just that eerie, suffocating silence. I asked for more details, trying to buy myself some time, but the voice on the other side became more insistent. "Sir, please open the door. It's very important." The way they said it, the way their voice dropped an octave, made me shiver. My gut told me this wasn't right, but my mind kept going back and forth. Maybe it really was important. Maybe I was just being irrational. But what if it wasn't? What if I was walking into a trap? I looked around the room, searching for something I could use as a weapon. My eyes settled on the lamp on the bedside table. It was heavy, solid enough to do some damage if I needed it to. I grabbed it, my hands shaking as I moved back toward the door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was on the other side. And then I unlocked the door. I opened it just a crack, enough to see a man standing there, dressed in what looked like a hotel uniform. But something was off. His eyes were too cold, too distant, and his smile was unnaturally wide. It didn't reach his eyes. He was staring at me with this eerie calmness, like he already knew how things were going to end. Before I could react, he shoved the door open with surprising force, knocking me backward. I stumbled, dropping the lamp as I tried to catch myself. He was inside the room before I could even scream. The door slammed shut behind him, trapping me inside with him. My mind went blank with fear, but my body reacted on instinct. I lunged for the lamp, but he was faster, grabbing me by the arm and yanking me back. I fought, kicking and clawing, trying to get free, but he was strong, much stronger than me. He pushed me onto the bed, pinning me down with his weight. I could see the cold determination in his eyes, the sick pleasure he took in, overpowering me. This wasn't the first time he'd done this. I was sure of it. I thrashed, trying to get him off me, but he was relentless. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, choking me, as I realized I might not get out of this alive. But then, just when I thought it was over, there was a loud noise from the hallway, like something heavy falling to the floor. The man froze, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I didn't think. I just acted. I pushed him off me with all the strength I had left and bolted for the door. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the lock, but I managed to wrench the door open and run out into the corridor, screaming for help. The hallway was empty, but I didn't care. I just kept running, my heart pounding in my ears until I found the front desk. The night clerk looked up, startled by my appearance, and I collapsed against the counter, gasping for breath as I tried to explain what had happened. They called the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of the man. He had vanished, leaving no trace behind. The hotel staff checked the security cameras, but the footage was mysteriously missing. It was as if he had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. That man wasn't hotel staff. He was something much worse. The next morning, I left the hotel, still shaking from the night before. I couldn't get his face out of my mind, those cold, dead eyes, that twisted smile. I knew I was lucky to be alive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that he might come back for me, or find someone else to prey on. The fear followed me long after I left that place, a constant reminder that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones under your bed, but the ones who knock on your door in the middle of the night. I checked into the hotel after a long, exhausting trip. It was one of those mid-range places, the kind you pick because it looks clean and reliable. The lobby was bright, the marble floors shiny, and the staff polite, almost too polite. They greeted me with wide smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. But I was too tired to care, chalking it up to my jet lag. That first night, I couldn't sleep. I'm a light sleeper, and the smallest noises keep me awake. Around midnight, I started hearing odd sounds in the hallway, muffled voices, doors creaking open and shut, footsteps that seemed to linger just outside my door. I tried to tell myself it was just other guests coming and going, but something about the way the sounds came and went made me uneasy. The next morning, I felt even more on edge. The housekeeping staff were strange. They avoided looking at me, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever I passed by. I tried to smile at one of them, but she quickly looked away, like she was scared. It was weird, but again, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe they were just shy or had been told not to bother guests, but things only got stranger. As the days passed, I started noticing small, out-of-place things in my room. A piece of paper under the bed with scribbled writing I couldn't fully make out, something about help and danger. The towels would be rearranged not in the neat way housekeeping usually does, but like someone had gone through them in a hurry. I also felt like I was being watched. Every time I left my room, I'd catch the staff looking at me, but they'd quickly turn away when I noticed them. I decided to confront the front desk about it. The manager, a man in his 50s with a stiff smile, assured me that everything was fine, that their staff was just very respectful and maybe a bit shy around foreigners. But his words felt hollow. His eyes didn't match his smile, and there was a coldness in his tone that made my stomach knot. That night, the paranoia really set in. The noises in the hallway got louder, more frequent, and now it wasn't just doors and voices. I could swear I heard things being dragged across the floor, heavy thuds that made my heart race. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. What was going on in this hotel? What were they hiding? The next day, I overheard bits of conversations between the staff. Words like shipment and preparation caught my attention. I tried to piece it together, but it didn't make sense. Or maybe it did, and I just didn't want to believe it. I started avoiding the staff, pretending not to notice their glances, their whispers. My thoughts were spiraling, and I didn't know what was real anymore. On the fourth night, everything clicked. I couldn't sleep again, so I started pacing the room, trying to think straight. That's when I found it. A small door behind the dresser that led to a crawl space. It was barely noticeable, and I don't know why I even looked there. But when I opened it, I found something that made my blood run cold. Documents, photos, all of them connected to missing people. People who had checked into this hotel and never checked out. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the truth. This hotel was a front for something horrible. Human trafficking, organ harvesting. I didn't know, but it was something dark, something that explained the strange behavior of the staff, the noises at night, the feeling of being watched. I knew I had to get out. I threw my things into my suitcase and made for the door, but when I tried to leave, I found that the exits were locked. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. The hotel was like a maze, with doors that led nowhere, windows that wouldn't open. I felt like a rat in a cage, and every second I stayed, the walls felt like they were closing in. Finally, I ran into one of the staff, a young man who had always seemed nervous around me. He tried to stop me, but I was desperate. I shoved past him, my fear giving me strength. He stumbled back, looking more scared than I was, and I saw the terror in his eyes. Maybe he was just as trapped as I was. I found a way out through a service exit. It wasn't easy, and I had to dodge more staff members who seemed to be searching for me, but I made it. I ran out into the night, the cool air hitting my face, and I didn't stop running until I was far away from that cursed place. But even as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. They have my personal information, my name, my ID, everything. What if they come after me? What if they're already watching me? I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see one of those too polite smiles, or worse, nothing at all before they grab me. I don't know what to do. I've told the police, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. Maybe they're in on it too. I can't trust anyone, and I can't stay in one place for too long. I just hope that by writing this, someone will believe me, someone will help. But deep down, I'm afraid it's too late. They know who I am, and they don't leave loose ends. I woke up with a jolt, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The first thing I noticed was how dark the room was, despite the fact that I had left the curtains open before falling asleep. But now, everything was pitch black. I reached for my phone to check the time, but the screen wouldn't turn on. I must have forgotten to charge it, I thought, but something about that didn't feel right. I tried to remember how I ended up back in my hotel room. I'd been out for drinks with some coworkers, but everything after a certain point was a blur. How much did I drink? How did I get back here? None of it made sense. My head hurt, like I had been hit, and the taste of something bitter was still on my tongue. I got up to go to the bathroom, thinking that some water might help clear my head. But when I reached for the door handle, it wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it was locked from the outside. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door. I tried to remember if I had locked it, but the more I thought about it, the less sure I became. I knocked on the door, then hit it with my fist, but no one answered. Panic started to creep in, and I felt my breathing become shallow and fast. I needed to get out. I tried the window next, but it wouldn't open. It was sealed shut, as if it had been glued that way. The phone in the room had no signal, and the TV wouldn't turn on. I was completely cut off from the outside world, and it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The hours dragged on, and with each passing minute, my fear grew. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no one came. My throat became sore, and my hands ached from banging on the hard wood. I slumped down against the door, tears streaming down my face. Why wasn't anyone helping me? Couldn't they hear me? I began to notice things in the room that I hadn't before. A chair that I was sure had been on the other side of the room was now closer to the bed. A small scratch on the wall that looked fresh. Items on the nightstand that weren't mine. A watch, a ring, things I didn't remember seeing before. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of these strange details. Had someone been in my room while I was asleep? Then the noises started, faint at first, like someone was walking in the hallway outside. But every time I called out, the noises stopped. I put my ear to the door, listening as the footsteps seemed to grow closer, then fade away. My nerves were shot, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. It wasn't long before I found the note. It had been slipped under the door, written in a language I didn't understand. The handwriting was shaky, almost as if whoever wrote it was in a hurry. I held it up, trying to make sense of the symbols, but it only made my head spin. Who had put this here? What did it mean? I don't know how much time passed before I heard the voice. It was low, almost a whisper, coming from the other side of the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to catch what it was saying. The words were muffled, but I could tell that whoever was speaking was talking to me. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. "Help me. I'm locked in." The voice responded, but the words didn't make any sense. They were strange, almost cryptic, and the more I listened, the more I felt dread settle into my bones. It felt like the voice knew something about me, something I didn't even know about myself. "You're not who you think you are," it said, and my blood ran cold. What did that mean? I tried to ask, but the voice went silent again, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That's when the memories started to come back. Flashes at first, but they were enough to make me feel sick. I saw myself, but it didn't feel like me. I was doing things, terrible things, but it was like watching someone else. The more I remembered, the more I realized that maybe I wasn't a victim in all of this. Maybe I had done something to deserve this. I began to question everything. The room felt like it was mocking me, pointing out things I had missed. There was a stain on the carpet that hadn't been there before. My clothes, folded neatly on the chair, had smudges on them, like I had been somewhere dirty. My reflection in the mirror looked wrong, like a stranger staring back at me. In a moment of pure desperation, I decided I had to get out, no matter what. I found a lamp on the nightstand and swung it at the window, but the glass wouldn't break. I hit the door next, slamming the lamp against it over and over until I thought my arms would give out. Just when I was about to give up, the door unlocked. I froze, staring at the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I reached out and turned the handle, pushing the door open. What I saw on the other side made my breath catch in my throat. There was no hallway, no exit, just another room, exactly like the one I had just left. The same furniture, the same bed, the same sealed window. But in this room, there was something different. Someone was sitting on the bed, their back turned to me. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I stepped inside, my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn around and run. But I couldn't. I had to know. I approached the figure, my hand shaking as I reached out to touch them. They turned around and I felt my stomach drop. It was me. The story ends here, my friend. If you're reading this, don't stay in room 203. When I first noticed things out of place in my room, I didn't think much of it. I'm a messy person by nature, so a book moved slightly, or clothes not folded the way I remembered, seemed normal. Maybe I was in a hurry and forgot. But then it kept happening. Day after day, little things, like the chair by my desk turned a bit to the side or my shoes lined up differently. It wasn't enough to make me worry, but enough to make me feel uneasy, like an itch I couldn't scratch. A feeling started to grow in me, a feeling that someone was watching. One night, I decided to test myself. I carefully placed a pen on the edge of my desk, straight and aligned with the edge. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, to prove that I was just being paranoid. The next morning, the pen had moved. It was no longer aligned, but slightly askew. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, just a tiny shift, but it was enough. I knew then that someone had been in my room while I slept. Panic gripped me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at that pen, my mind racing. Who could it be? Was it just my imagination, or was there really someone coming into my room? I couldn't think of anyone who had a reason to do this. It made no sense, but the fear was real. I started to question everything. Did I lock the door last night? Did I hear any noises? But nothing came to mind. Everything seemed normal, except for that pen. I knew I had to find out what was happening. I needed proof, something that would show me I wasn't just losing my mind. That night, I spread a thin layer of baby powder on the floor near the door. It was barely visible, but it would show footprints if someone walked through it. I also placed a small hidden camera in the corner of my room, pointing towards the door. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound made me jump. Every creak in the house sounded like a footstep. When morning came, I quickly checked the floor and the camera. The powder had been disturbed. There were faint footprints leading from the door to the bed, but they were smudged, as if someone had tried to erase them. My heart pounded as I reviewed the footage from the camera. My hands shook as I fast-forwarded through hours of nothing. But then, just past 3 a.m., the door slowly opened. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a shadowy figure slip into the room. The figure moved quietly, almost like a ghost, and headed straight for my bed. The fear I felt was indescribable. This was no ghost, though. This was real. A living person sneaking into my room in the dead of night. The figure hovered by my bed for a few moments, then turned and left, closing the door softly behind them. I couldn't make out their face or features. They were careful, too careful. I rewound and watched it again, hoping to catch something I missed, but it was the same each time. Someone was coming into my room while I was asleep, and I had no idea who or why. I knew I couldn't let this continue. That night, I decided I wouldn't sleep. I would lie there, pretending, and wait. The hours dragged by as I lay still, my ears straining to catch any sound. I heard the usual creaks and groans of the house, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until just after 3 a.m., the door creaked open, just like in the video. My heart raced, but I kept my breathing steady, kept my eyes shut just enough to see through my lashes. The soft footsteps moved closer, each one making my heart pound harder. The fear was suffocating, but I didn't move. The figure stood by my bed, just like before, but this time I was ready. I snapped my eyes open and reached for the light. The figure bolted, but I was faster. I flipped the switch, flooding the room with light, but no one was there. The door was still slightly open, swaying as if someone had just passed through. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, peering down the hallway. I saw a shadow disappearing around the corner. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to follow, running down the hallway. But when I turned the corner, the hallway was empty. It was like they vanished into thin air. I was shaking all over. I went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Someone had been there, right there, in my room. I could still feel their presence, still hear the soft footsteps in my mind. The reality hit me hard. Someone had been in my room every night standing over me while I slept, and they were still out there, watching, waiting. I called the police the next morning. They came, but there wasn't much they could do. There were no clear prints, no signs of forced entry. The footage was too blurry to identify anyone. They suggested I change the locks, install better security, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. To them, it probably looked like I was overreacting, maybe even imagining things. I changed the locks anyway. I installed extra security, but it didn't help. The fear was still there, creeping in at night, whispering to me that it wasn't over. I still lie awake every night, waiting, listening, afraid to close my eyes. The worst part is not knowing if they will come back or if they are already here, watching me, waiting for the right moment. The thought keeps me up at night, the silence of my room now filled with a fear I can't escape. I never expected my night to end like this. Traveling for work has become routine for me, a life of airports, hotels, and lonely dinners. Tonight was no different. After a long day of meetings, I found myself at the hotel bar, a dimly lit place that seemed almost too perfect for a quiet drink. The soft hum of jazz music and the clinking of glasses around me felt comforting. I thought it was just another normal evening. The bar was half empty, the kind of place where you could sit unnoticed, enjoy a drink, and let the day slip away. I ordered a whiskey, something to help me unwind. I didn't even bother checking my phone. I just wanted to be present, to relax. The bartender nodded as he poured my drink, and I watched the amber liquid swirl in the glass. It felt good to be alone, to let my mind wander in a place where nobody knew me. As I took the first sip, I noticed him. He sat a few seats away, casually dressed, but with a certain charm that made him stand out. Our eyes met briefly, and he smiled. I nodded back, not thinking much of it, but within a few minutes he moved closer, sliding into the seat next to mine. "Long day?" he asked, his voice smooth and friendly. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me. There was something in his tone that put me at ease, even though I didn't know him. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Work can be exhausting sometimes." He laughed softly, nodding as if he understood completely. We talked about simple things: work, the city, the usual small talk that strangers engage in. He was good at it, too good. I found myself relaxing, the conversation flowing easily, his presence somehow comforting in that lonely place. He offered to buy me another drink. I hesitated for a moment, but he smiled again. That charming smile that seemed to melt away any doubts I had. I agreed, figuring there was no harm in it. The bartender poured another whiskey, and I took it, thanking him politely. That's when things started to feel off. I didn't notice it at first. It was just a slight dizziness, a mild fuzziness in my head that I attributed to the alcohol and fatigue. But as I continued to sip the drink, the feeling grew stronger. My thoughts became jumbled, harder to string together. I tried to focus on the conversation, but his words seemed to blur into one another, as if I was hearing them underwater. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the room seemed to tilt slightly, the lights too bright, too dim, all at once. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice still calm but with a hint of concern. I nodded quickly, too quickly, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, just the drink hitting harder than usual. But deep down, a knot of fear began to tighten in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I wanted to leave, to get up and go back to my room, but my body felt heavy, sluggish. My hand, which had been holding the glass, trembled slightly as I placed it back on the bar. My mouth felt dry, and when I tried to speak, my voice came out wrong, slurred, like I wasn't in control anymore. Panic bubbled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to not show that I was afraid. Maybe it was just the tiredness, the stress, maybe. But then I saw the look in his eyes. It had changed. The friendly, easygoing smile was still there, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. They were cold, calculating, watching me closely. He wasn't concerned. He was waiting. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but the words stuck in my throat. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, but my limbs felt like they were filled with lead. My vision blurred even more, the room spinning slightly as I tried to hold on to consciousness. Everything was moving too fast, and yet time seemed to slow down. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there, frozen in place, as the reality of what was happening crashed down on me. I've been drugged. The realization hit me like a cold wave. My mind screamed at me to do something, to run, to fight, but my body refused to obey. My fingers twitched, but that was all. I could barely hold my head up, my eyes struggling to stay open as the world around me started to fade into darkness. The stranger leaned in closer, his face inches from mine, and whispered something in my ear. The words were soft, almost gentle, but I couldn't make them out. They were just sounds, meaningless and distant, as if he was speaking from the other side of a thick wall. I tried to focus, to understand what he was saying, but it was too late. My body was shutting down, my vision narrowing to a dark tunnel, his face the last thing I saw before everything went black. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, I woke up in my hotel room, the morning light filtering through the curtains. My head throbbed painfully, and my mouth was dry, my tongue feeling like sandpaper. I was alone, lying on the bed, fully clothed. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a nightmare, some terrible dream brought on by stress and alcohol. But then I saw the empty glass on the nightstand, the same glass from the bar, and the events of the night before came rushing back. I don't know how I got back to my room or what happened after I blacked out. But one thing is certain, I wasn't alone last night, and whatever that stranger had planned for me, it was something I'm grateful I didn't fully experience. The fear still lingers, though, that awful, sickening fear that I was so close to something horrible, something that could have changed my life forever. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened, about the whisper in my ear as I lost consciousness. The memory haunts me, even now, as I sit in the safety of my home, far away from that hotel bar. I've tried to convince myself that I was just lucky, that I managed to escape whatever terrible fate was in store for me. But the truth is, I don't know what happened. And that's the scariest part of all. I needed a break, something to clear my head from the stress at work, so I booked a last-minute weekend trip to a hotel tucked away in the mountains. It seemed like the perfect place, far from the noise of the city, surrounded by trees and silence. The drive was long, winding through narrow roads that made me feel more isolated with every mile. But that was the point, wasn't it? To escape. When I finally arrived, the hotel looked perfect. It was old, with creaky wooden floors and dim lighting that made it feel cozy. The check-in process was quick, the receptionist barely looking up from her computer as she handed me the key. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, but I figured it was because it was the off-season. Maybe that was why it was so cheap. My room was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway. The walls were lined with old photos of the hotel from years ago, people dressed in old-fashioned clothes, smiling in black and white. There was something off about them, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just tired from the drive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, the silence of the hotel almost suffocating. I wasn't used to it. I missed the hum of the city, the distant sound of cars and people. I decided to take a walk to clear my head, hoping it would make me sleepy. The hallway was even darker at night, only a few lights flickering weakly. As I walked, I noticed one of the doors was slightly open. I wouldn't have thought much of it, but I heard voices coming from inside. They were low, almost like whispers, but I could tell something was wrong. It was the tone, tense and angry, that made me stop. I hesitated, my heart beating faster. I knew I should keep walking, mind my own business, but something made me stop and peek through the crack in the door. What I saw made my blood run cold. Inside, there were 3 men standing over a fourth who was on his knees, his face covered in blood. The man on the ground was begging, his voice shaking, but the others didn't care. One of them had a gun, and before I could even process what I was seeing, he raised it and shot the man in the head. I must have gasped or made some noise because suddenly all 3 of them were looking at the door. My body froze, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. I felt like I was glued to the spot, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. One of the men, the one with the gun, started walking towards the door. That was enough to break the spell. I turned and ran, not caring how much noise I made. I just needed to get back to my room, to lock the door, to hide. When I got back to my room, I locked the door and pushed the dresser in front of it, my hands shaking so badly it took me a few tries. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? But what if they were outside, waiting for me to make a move? I sat on the bed, my back against the wall, trying to calm down, but I couldn't stop shaking. I stayed like that all night, barely breathing, listening for any sound outside my door. But everything was quiet, almost too quiet, like the hotel was holding its breath. When the first light of dawn came through the window, I decided I needed to leave. I couldn't stay here, not after what I saw. I quickly packed my things, trying to be as quiet as possible. I hadn't heard anything all night, but I didn't want to take any chances. As I opened the door, I looked both ways down the hallway. It was empty, but I could feel the tension in the air, like the walls themselves were watching me. I made my way down to the lobby, trying to stay calm, to act normal. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw them. The 3 men were standing near the entrance, talking quietly among themselves. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned to go back up the stairs, but one of them looked up and saw me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and then he said something to the others. I didn't wait to hear what it was. I ran. I heard them behind me, their footsteps pounding on the wooden floor, getting closer. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. I ended up in the back of the hotel in some kind of storage room. There was only one door and I could hear them coming down the hall. I looked around desperately for something, anything I could use to defend myself. My hands found a rusty old hammer on a shelf, and I gripped it tightly, my heart beating so fast I thought I might pass out. The door burst open, and the man with the gun came in first. He smiled when he saw me, like he was enjoying this, and took a step forward. I didn't think. I just swung the hammer with all the strength I had left. It hit him in the side of the head, and he went down hard. The other 2 were right behind him, and I knew I couldn't take them both. I ran past them, my legs burning, but I didn't stop. I kept running until I found the back door of the hotel, and I burst out into the morning light. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys out of my pocket. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, not looking back. As I drove away, I kept expecting to see them in the rearview mirror, chasing me. But there was nothing. Just the empty road and the sound of my own breathing. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, looking for me. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Story title: The Note. I remember when it all started, the first day of our trip to the cabin. It was supposed to be a weekend away from everything, a break from the noise of the city. My friend Alex suggested it. They seemed really excited, talking about how peaceful and quiet the cabin would be. But as we drove deeper into the forest, that excitement turned into something else, something I couldn't quite name. Alex had been acting strange lately, distant, like they were thinking about something important but didn't want to share it with me. I told myself it was just stress, or maybe they were tired. The cabin was as remote as Alex had described. No neighbors, no phone signal, just trees and silence. It should have been relaxing, but instead, I felt uneasy the moment we arrived. I noticed that Alex was watching me closely, too closely. Every time I looked up, their eyes were on me. When I asked if everything was okay, they smiled and said they were just happy to be there. But the smile didn't reach their eyes, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear things you usually wouldn't. I kept hearing faint noises like someone was moving around. I thought it was just the wind, but it still made me uncomfortable. Around midnight, I finally dozed off, only to wake up suddenly. I felt something under my pillow, something that wasn't there before. I pulled it out, a piece of paper, crumpled and worn. The words on it were scribbled in a rush. "Do not trust the person you came with." My heart raced as I read the note again and again, trying to make sense of it. The handwriting wasn't mine, and it wasn't Alex's either. It looked almost desperate, like the person who wrote it was scared. My first thought was that it was some kind of joke, but then I remembered how Alex had been acting. My hands shook as I held the note, trying to think of what to do next. Just then, the door to my room creaked open. Alex stood there, smiling that same strange smile. I shoved the note under the pillow, trying to act normal, but I couldn't hide the fear in my eyes. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the note. Alex seemed cheerful, making breakfast and talking about plans for the day, but something was off. I noticed how they avoided my eyes, how their smiles seemed forced. They made a few strange comments, things that didn't make sense. At one point, they asked if I had slept well, their voice too casual, like they were trying to gauge my reaction. I lied and said I had, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching closely. As the day went on, my fear grew. I started remembering things that hadn't seemed important before, like how Alex had been so insistent on this trip, how they'd been acting so strange. I kept wondering if I'd missed something, some sign that things weren't right. I tried to stay calm, to act like nothing was wrong, but inside, I was terrified. Every time Alex spoke, I felt like there was a hidden meaning behind their words, something dark. By the time night came, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. While Alex was outside, I started searching the cabin. I looked through their things, trying to find something, anything that would explain the note. Under the bed, I found Alex's phone, hidden in a place where I wasn't supposed to find it. The screen was cracked, and there were strange messages on it, messages that didn't make sense. There were photos too, photos of me, taken when I wasn't looking. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through them, realizing that Alex had been watching me, documenting everything. I wanted to run, to leave the cabin and never look back, but I knew I couldn't. We were miles from anywhere, with no way to contact the outside world. I didn't know what Alex was planning, but I knew I was in danger. I put the phone back where I found it, trying to keep calm. When Alex came back inside, they noticed something was wrong. They asked me if everything was okay, their voice calm, too calm. I couldn't look them in the eye as I lied, saying I was just tired. That night, I confronted Alex. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I pulled out the note and demanded to know what it meant. Who had written it? Alex looked at me, their face blank for a moment before they burst out laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh, though. It was cold, almost cruel. They told me it was just a joke, something to scare me. But then their expression changed. Their eyes darkened, and their smile faded. "You really think I'd do something like that?" they asked, their voice low and threatening. I didn't know what to say. The fear was overwhelming, choking me. I realized then that I was trapped. There was no one to help me, nowhere to run. I was alone with someone I couldn't trust, someone who might want to hurt me. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked them again, but they just stared at me, their face cold and unreadable. In the silence that followed, I realized the truth. The note wasn't a joke. It was a warning from someone who had been here before, someone who didn't make it out. My blood ran cold as I understood what that meant. Alex knew about the note all along. They had been waiting for me to figure it out, to realize that I was in danger. The last thing I remember is Alex's smile as they moved closer, their hand reaching for something hidden in their jacket. I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember how I got away, or if I even did. All I know is that I should have listened to the note. If you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, don't ignore the warning signs. Trust your instincts, because you might not get a second chance. For the last few nights, I've had this weird feeling. It's like I'm being watched, but when I look around, there's no one there. I live alone in a small apartment, just me and the silence that sometimes gets too loud. I try to ignore it, but it's been making sleep harder. Last night, I stayed up late reading in bed, trying to push away the unease that kept crawling up my spine. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it. A knock. Sharp, loud, like someone was banging on the door with urgency. It startled me so bad I nearly dropped my book. My heart pounded as I sat up, listening. The apartment was silent again, and for a second, I wondered if I'd imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, like whoever was out there wanted to make sure I heard. I froze, unsure of what to do. Who would be knocking at my door in the middle of the night? I waited a moment, listening for any other sounds, but there was nothing. The knocking had stopped. My heart was still racing, but I forced myself out of bed. Maybe it was a neighbor who needed help or some kind of emergency. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I reached the door and hesitated before opening it. My hand shook as I turned the knob, slowly pulling the door open. The hallway outside was empty. No one was there. I stepped out, looking around, but it was just me and the dim light from the hallway lamps. I stood there for a moment, confused, and starting to feel a bit foolish. Maybe it was a prank, I thought. But as I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye. Just inside the doorway, on the carpet, was a small blood stain. It was dark, fresh, and the sight of it made my stomach churn. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I quickly shut the door, locking it behind me, my hands trembling. I stared at the bloodstain, trying to make sense of it. Where did it come from? Why was it here? I wiped it up with a paper towel, but the image of it was burned into my mind. The rest of the night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the knock and the blood, replaying it over and over in my head. My apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt alien and threatening. I stayed in bed, eyes wide open, waiting for the morning light. The next few days were worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, lurking just out of sight. Every small noise in the apartment made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. Everything felt sinister. I kept checking the door, expecting to see more blood or hear another knock, but there was nothing. Still, I felt on edge all the time. I even started avoiding going out, just in case something or someone was out there. I told a couple of friends about it, hoping they'd have some rational explanation, but they just brushed it off. "You're probably stressed," one of them said. "Maybe you imagined it," said another. But I knew what I saw. The bloodstain was real, and so was the knock. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Every shadow, every sound seemed like a threat, and I couldn't get rid of the sense that I was being watched. Desperate for answers, I finally decided to check the building's security footage. I went down to the building manager, trying to act casual as I asked if I could see the tapes from that night. He agreed, though he seemed a bit puzzled by my request. We sat down in his office and he pulled up the footage. My heart pounded as we fast-forwarded through the hours until we reached the time of the knock. At first, there was nothing. Just an empty hallway, the same dim lighting I'd seen when I opened the door. Then, a shadow appeared on the screen, right in front of my door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched. The figure was standing there, barely moving, just staring at my door. I couldn't make out any details. Whoever it was seemed to blend into the darkness. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, then suddenly raised a hand and knocked, twice. I watched in horror as the figure leaned down, doing something to the floor. Then, just before I opened the door, they slipped away, disappearing down the hall and out of sight. The screen showed me opening the door, looking around, and then staring down at the floor. The exact moment I saw the bloodstain. My stomach twisted into knots. Someone had been there, right outside my door, and I'd missed them by mere seconds. I left the manager's office in a daze, my mind reeling. Who was that? What did they want? Why did they leave blood at my door? Questions swirled in my head, but there were no answers, just a growing sense of dread. I returned to my apartment, feeling more trapped than ever. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it, and sat down in the living room, trying to calm myself. But then, just as I started to think I might be overreacting, I heard it again. The knock. The same sharp, loud knock that had started all of this. I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. It was the same knock, exactly the same as before. My hands began to shake, and I felt cold all over. I stared at the door, unable to move, unable to breathe, as the knocking continued, relentless, echoing through the apartment. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't dare move, didn't dare even blink. I knew that if I opened the door, I might find no one there again. But this time, I also knew that someone was out there, watching, waiting. I still don't know if I should open the door or not, and honestly, I'm too scared to find out what's waiting for me on the other side. When I checked into the hotel, I knew something wasn't right. I don't know why I chose that place. Maybe it was the cheap price or the fact that it was far away from everything. I just wanted to get away, to disappear for a while. The moment I stepped inside, the emptiness hit me. The lobby was dimly lit, the air stale as if no one had opened a window in days. The woman at the front desk barely looked at me, her face blank as she handed me the key. "Room 104, she said, pointing down a long hallway. The hallway seemed endless, with old, peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. My room was at the very end, and when I opened the door, I was met with silence. The room was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto nothing but darkness. It felt like the walls were closing in, but I was too tired to care. I threw my bag on the bed and sat down, trying to shake off the strange feeling that clung to me. After a while, I decided to explore the hotel. There was something strange about the place, something that made my skin crawl, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I walked through the empty halls, I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was no one there. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I saw him. It was just a quick glimpse, a shadow at the end of the hall. I blinked, and he was gone. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to keep walking. I told myself I was tired, that it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Back in my room, I tried to calm down. I turned on the TV, but the static-filled screen did nothing to ease my nerves. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was safe, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow, felt those eyes watching me. The next morning, things got worse. I woke up to find my things had been moved. My bag, which I had left on the bed, was now on the floor. My clothes were scattered, like someone had gone through them. I went down to the front desk, but the woman there just stared at me blankly. No one had been in my room, she said. I asked about the other guests, but she shook her head. The hotel was empty, she told me. I was the only one there. That's when I started to panic. If no one else was in the hotel, then who had moved my things? I went back to my room, locking the door behind me. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I could feel his presence, even when I couldn't see him. Every time I turned around, I expected to find him standing there, but the room was always empty. The figure began appearing more often. Sometimes I'd catch him in the mirror, just behind me, but when I turned around, he'd be gone. Other times, I'd see him in the corner of my eye, but when I looked, there was nothing there. It was like he was playing a game with me, letting me know he was always close, but never letting me catch him. One night, I decided to leave. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed my things and headed for the door, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, I knew something was wrong. The hallways seemed different, longer somehow, twisting in ways they hadn't before. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I started to walk faster, but the more I moved, the more lost I became. The walls closed in, the doors all looked the same, and no matter how far I went, I couldn't find my way out. I was trapped. That's when I saw him again. This time, he didn't disappear. He stood at the end of the hallway, his face hidden in the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back to my room, and I couldn't find the exit. He started to move towards me, slowly, deliberately, like he knew I had nowhere to run. I turned and ran, not knowing where I was going, just trying to get away. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape him. He was always there, just behind me, always one step ahead, leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. The halls twisted and turned, the walls seeming to close in, until finally, I found myself in a dead end. He was right behind me. I turned to face him, my back against the wall. As he stepped into the light, I finally saw his face. It was familiar, too familiar. It was someone I knew, someone I thought I had left behind long ago. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had run from him before, but I couldn't escape him this time. He knew everything about me, every secret, every lie, and now he was here to make me pay. I don't remember how I got out of the hotel. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, driving as fast as I could, not caring where I was going, just trying to get as far away as possible. But even now, as I write this, I can't shake the feeling that he's still there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't know if I'll ever be safe again. All I know is that I can't go back, not to that hotel, not to the life I left behind, because he's out there and he's not done with me yet. I booked a small hotel in a quiet town far away from the stress of my everyday life. I thought it would be the perfect place to clear my mind. The hotel was old, with creaky wooden floors and faded wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been changed in decades. There was a faint smell in the air, something sour and damp. It reminded me of old basements, but I told myself it was just the age of the building. I checked in at the front desk, where an older woman gave me my key without much conversation. She seemed distracted, almost like she didn't want to be there. My room was on the third floor, at the end of a long hallway. The carpet was worn and stained, and the light flickered as I walked. My room was small, with just a bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the empty street below. As I unpacked, I noticed something strange. A drawer in the dresser didn't close all the way. I pulled it open and found an old leather journal tucked in the back. The journal was thick, its pages yellowed and crumpled, with dark stains on some of them. I ran my fingers over the cover, feeling uneasy. The stains looked like blood, dried and dark. I almost put it back, but something made me open it. The first few pages were filled with neat handwriting, dated years ago. It seemed like guests before me had written in it, each entry describing their stay in this very room. The first few entries were harmless, talking about the weather or the town. But as I read further, the entries became darker. One guest wrote about hearing strange noises at night, soft footsteps in the hallway when no one should be there. Another talked about a feeling of being watched, even when they were alone. The most recent entries were the worst. One described waking up with scratches on their arms, too deep to be from an accident. Another ended abruptly, mid-sentence, with no explanation. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to these people. The sun was setting by the time I finished reading. The room felt colder, and I noticed the smell had gotten stronger, more sour. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the journal get to me. But as night fell, the sounds began. At first, it was just soft footsteps outside my door. I told myself it was another guest, but when I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. Then came the whispers, so quiet I couldn't make out what was being said. They seemed to come from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath me. My heart raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, just like the guests before me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sounds grew louder. The footsteps stopped right outside my door, and I held my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. I thought about leaving, just packing up and driving home, but something kept me there, frozen in place. I didn't want to believe that the journal could be real, that what it described could be happening to me. But then I found the entry that changed everything. It was dated just a week before, written in shaky handwriting. The guest described everything I had experienced: the smell, the noises, the feeling of being watched. The last line made my blood run cold. If you're reading this, get out, now. Don't wait. Don't look back. I panicked. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my things, and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I pulled and twisted the handle, but it was stuck, like something was holding it shut from the other side. The whispers were louder now, closer. I could hear them just beyond the door, but still, I couldn't understand the words. I ran to the window, trying to open it, but it was sealed tight. My phone had no signal, and the old landline in the room was dead. I was trapped. The footsteps started again, slowly, methodically, coming closer and closer. The door creaked, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The last thing I remember is the door slowly opening behind me, just like the journal described. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The whispers were in my ear, and the last thing I heard before everything went dark was the sound of the door closing behind me. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, it was morning. The door was open, and the room was quiet. My bag was packed, sitting by the door like I had left it there myself. The journal was gone. I didn't wait to find out what happened. I grabbed my things and ran, not stopping until I was in my car, miles away from that place. I don't know if what I experienced was real, or if it was all in my head. But I can't forget the things I read in that journal, or the sounds I heard that night. I never should have opened it. I should have left it where I found it, hidden in that drawer. But now, it's too late. I'll never forget that hotel, or the feeling of something watching me from the shadows. And I'll never go back to that town. If you ever find yourself there, stay away from that hotel. Don't open the drawer, and whatever you do, don't read the journal. I checked into the hotel with high hopes. The place was far too luxurious for someone like me, but after years of saving and dreaming, I decided to treat myself. As soon as I stepped into the grand lobby, the richness of the place hit me. Marble floors, chandeliers, and staff dressed in immaculate uniforms. They greeted me with wide smiles, their words polished, almost rehearsed. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Maybe they were just really good at their job, I told myself. But there was something in the way they looked at me. Too intense, too observant. I brushed it off as nerves. This was the nicest place I had ever been, after all. It was only natural to feel a bit out of place. When I got to my room, everything was perfect. The bed looked like a cloud. The view was stunning, and there was even a welcome note with my name on it. But then, something odd happened. As I unpacked, I felt eyes on me. I turned, and there was a staff member just outside my door, pretending to dust a painting. She smiled when I noticed her, but it was a tight, forced smile. My skin prickled with unease. Over the next day, I started to notice more of these coincidences. Whenever I left my room, there was always someone nearby. A bellboy in the hallway, a housekeeper cleaning a spotless floor, a concierge suddenly appearing to ask if I needed anything. It felt like they were everywhere, always watching. In the restaurant, the waiter hovered a little too close, refilling my glass before I even had a chance to ask. At first, I thought it was just great service. But it didn't take long before it started to feel invasive. No matter where I went, someone was always there, watching, waiting. I tried to ignore it, but their eyes followed me everywhere. I felt like a fish in a glass bowl, on display for their amusement. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing footsteps outside my door, soft and deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth. When I finally dozed off, I had nightmares of faceless people standing over me, watching me sleep. The next day, things got worse. I overheard two staff members talking in hushed voices. They mentioned my room number and something about keeping an eye on me. My heart raced. What did they mean by that? Why were they watching me? My thoughts spiraled. I felt trapped, like I was caught in some kind of twisted game. I decided to confront one of them. I chose the maid who always seemed to be lingering near my room. When I asked her why she was always around, she just smiled and said, "We're here to make sure you have everything you need." But her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her words were too smooth, too practiced. My stomach twisted with fear. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what was going on. I started exploring the hotel, going down hallways that seemed off limits, trying doors that should have been locked. That's when I found it, a small room, tucked away behind the staff-only area. Inside, there were files, lots of them, each with a guest's name. My name was on one of the folders. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there were notes about everything I had done since arriving. What time I left my room, what I ordered for dinner, even a note about the time I had spent looking out the window. My blood ran cold. They were monitoring my every move. Why? For what purpose? I stumbled back to my room, my mind racing. I needed to leave, but as I tried to check out, I was met with polite resistance. The front desk staff smiled, offering to extend my stay for free, suggesting I relax and enjoy myself a bit longer. But their eyes were hard, almost threatening. My heart pounded. They weren't going to let me leave. Panicked, I tried to sneak out. I grabbed my things and headed for the elevator, but every time I thought I was alone, a staff member would appear, blocking my path, offering help with a sickly, sweet smile. It felt like they were hurting me, guiding me back to my room. I was being trapped. Finally, I made it to the manager's office. I demanded to know what was going on, my voice shaking with fear. The manager just smiled, a cold, detached smile that made my blood run cold. "This is all part of our service," he said calmly. "We like to ensure our guests are well taken care of." His words made no sense, and yet there was something terrifying in his calmness. It was as if he knew I wouldn't be able to leave. I backed away, my mind screaming to get out, but my body felt frozen, as if I was being pulled deeper into their twisted game. In a last, desperate attempt, I bolted for the door, racing down the hallway. I could hear footsteps behind me, quick and steady, but I didn't dare look back. When I finally burst through the front doors, the night air hit me like a slap. I kept running until I was far from the hotel, only stopping when I reached a busy street. I thought I was safe, but even now, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching me. When I checked into a new hotel the next day, the phone in my room rang as soon as I closed the door. My heart stopped when I picked it up and heard nothing but silence on the other end. I'm starting to think I'll never escape them. I'm not sure why I felt uneasy that night. Maybe it was the way the shadows clung to the corners of the small motel room, or the strange silence that filled the space, thick and heavy. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb that hung from the ceiling, casting an uneven light on the faded wallpaper. It was supposed to be a quick stopover on my way to visit a friend, nothing special. I'd booked the cheapest place I could find, not expecting much, but as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to distract myself by flipping through channels on the old TV, but nothing held my attention. I couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I wasn't used to being alone like this. Maybe I was just tired from the long drive. The first sound was faint, barely noticeable. I thought I imagined it, a soft thud, like something heavy being moved. I paused, listening, but the sound didn't come again. I tried to focus on the TV, but the noise nagged at me, pulling my attention away. A few minutes later, I heard it again, louder this time. It came from the room next door, and it sounded like someone dragging furniture across the floor. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the guest in the next room was rearranging things, or maybe they'd dropped something heavy. But the noise continued, irregular and strange. It didn't sound like normal movements. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. Then there was a scratching sound, like nails against wood, slow and drawn out. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I started to feel a knot in my stomach. My room was connected to the next by a thin wall, and suddenly, that wall felt too thin, too fragile. The sounds were getting louder, more insistent. My heart began to race as I considered my options. I could ignore it, pretend I didn't hear anything, or I could investigate. The thought of stepping out into the hallway made my skin crawl, but staying still and doing nothing was worse. There was a small peephole in the wall, just above where the nightstand stood. It was strange. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed like the only thing I could focus on. I approached it slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I leaned in, pressing my eye to the tiny opening, and peered into the room next door. At first, I couldn't see much. The room was dimly lit, just like mine, with shadows dancing across the walls. But then I saw movement. Someone was in there, moving around with quick, jerky motions. My heart skipped a beat when I realized what they were doing. The person was trying to pry open the window, using what looked like a crowbar. They were desperate, frantic, and the sounds I'd heard suddenly made sense. The scratching, the thuds. It was all from their attempts to break in. I should have called for help, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who would try to break into a motel room like this? And why? My thoughts were interrupted when the person suddenly stopped what they were doing. They stood still for a moment, as if listening, and then, slowly, they turned their head toward the wall, toward me. My breath caught in my throat. Through the peephole, I saw the person's eyes, cold, dark, and filled with something I couldn't quite describe. Fear shot through me as I realized they knew I was watching. I jerked back from the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced with panic. What should I do? Should I run? Should I hide? Before I could decide, I heard another noise, this time coming from my own door. The doorknob rattled, the same slow, deliberate scratching sound following. My hands shook as I tried to think. I pushed a chair against the door, trying to block it, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. The scratching grew louder, more aggressive, as if the person on the other side was testing the door, seeing how much force it would take to break in. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to dial for help, but the signal was weak, and the call wouldn't go through. My breathing was shallow, my thoughts a blur of fear and desperation. I didn't know if I should stay quiet or scream for help. The idea of making noise seemed dangerous, like it would draw the intruder's attention even more. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, like the calm before a storm. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My ears strained to catch any sound, but there was nothing, just the oppressive quiet. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the door, my heart in my throat. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to hear any signs of movement outside, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and fast. My hand hovered over the doorknob, unsure if I should open it or push the chair back in place. Before I could make a decision, there was a loud bang against the door, so sudden and violent that I stumbled back, nearly falling to the floor. The door shook on its hinges, and my blood ran cold. The fear that had been building inside me reached its peak, and I couldn't think, couldn't move. The banging continued, relentless and terrifying, and I knew, deep down, that whatever was on the other side wasn't going to stop until it got in. The last thing I remember is the sound of the door splintering under the pressure, and then everything went black. I checked into the hotel because it was cheap, close to the places I wanted to visit and available on short notice. The building looked old and worn down, like it hadn't been cared for in years. The lobby was small, with faded wallpaper and furniture that seemed to be from a different time. The receptionist barely looked up when I checked in, handing me a key without a word. I didn't mind the hotel's condition. I was tired and needed a place to sleep. My room was on the third floor, at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The carpet under my feet was soft but sticky, like something had spilled and never been cleaned properly. The door creaked loudly when I pushed it open, and the first thing I noticed was the stale smell inside the room. It wasn't dirty, but it felt like nobody had stayed there for a long time. I threw my bag on the bed, planning to rest for a bit before going out again. I lay down and closed my eyes, but the room was too quiet. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but makes you aware of every little sound. That's when I first heard it. A faint muffled noise, like a cry or a scream, coming from the walls. I sat up, listening hard, but the noise stopped. I told myself it was probably just the sound of the old building settling, or maybe other guests in their rooms. I was too tired to think much about it, so I shrugged it off and went back to lying down. But that night, the noise came back. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, but every time I started to drift off, the sound would start again. It was a muffled scream, low at first, then getting louder, then fading away again. It wasn't constant, but it happened often enough that I couldn't sleep. I got up, walked around the room, trying to find the source of the sound. I put my ear to the walls, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was like the sound was moving, shifting from one part of the wall to another. After hours of this, I finally fell asleep, but my dreams were filled with the sound of those muffled screams. The next day, I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just the noises of an old building, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me because I was so tired. But that night, it happened again. The screams were louder, more desperate, and now it wasn't just at night. I could hear them during the day too, whenever the room was quiet. It was starting to get to me. I felt like I was going crazy, hearing things that couldn't be real. I even started to doubt myself, wondering if it was just my imagination. But the sound was too real, too clear. I couldn't take it anymore. On the third day, I decided to find out what was making the noise. I started by knocking on the walls, hoping to hear something that would help me figure out where the sound was coming from. At first, nothing happened. But then, as I was knocking on the wall near the bed, I heard a hollow sound. My heart skipped a beat. The wall wasn't solid. There was something behind it. I started searching the room, looking for anything that could explain the noise. That's when I noticed the old painting on the wall. It was the only thing in the room that didn't seem to belong. The frame was thick with dust, and the picture was of a gloomy, dark landscape. I pulled it off the wall, and behind it, I found a small door. The door was almost hidden in the wall, painted the same color as the rest of the room. It was locked, and there was no key in sight. But I couldn't let it go. I had to know what was behind that door. I tried everything to open it, using a knife from the small kitchenette to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. My frustration grew as the screams started again, this time louder and closer. I could hear them right behind the door, like someone was trapped inside. Desperation took over, and I used my full strength to break the door open. Finally, with one last push, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. The air inside was stale, and the smell that hit me was worse than anything I'd ever smelled. It was the smell of rot, of something long dead. I hesitated for a moment, but the screams, now clearly the cries of a person in pain, pushed me forward. I crawled into the passage, the walls closing in on me, making it hard to breathe. The passage led to a small hidden room. The walls were covered in scratches, and the floor was stained dark, like old blood. In the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pile of torn, dirty clothes, a broken chain, and scattered yellowed bones. This was where the screams were coming from, not from someone alive, but from the memory of someone who had suffered here, trapped and alone. I realized the screams I heard weren't just echoes of the past. They were real. People had been kept here, tortured, and left to die, and I wasn't the first to hear them. The room was filled with the remnants of those who came before me, those who tried to uncover the truth and never made it out. Panic took over. I had to get out. The walls of the passage seemed to close in on me as I tried to crawl back out. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short gasps as I struggled to move. The screams grew louder, more urgent, as if warning me that I would be next. I could feel the walls pressing against me, making it hard to move, hard to breathe. I was stuck, trapped like the others. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of the door slamming shut behind me, sealing me inside the walls of that cursed hotel, my own screams joining the chorus of those who came before me. I woke up covered in mud and bruises, my body aching as if I'd been in a fight. The hotel room was dim, the curtains drawn tight, blocking out the morning light. I tried to remember what happened the night before, but my mind was blank. I wasn't drunk or high. I was sure of that. But how did I end up like this? I looked around, hoping for some clue, but everything in the room looked normal. My clothes were neatly folded on the chair, my suitcase was where I left it, and my phone was on the nightstand, fully charged. Nothing seemed out of place except for me. The mud on my skin was dry and cracked, leaving a mess on the white sheets. I ran my fingers over the bruises on my arms and legs, wincing at the pain. They were fresh, dark purple, and ugly. I couldn't figure out how I got them. I hadn't left the room, at least I didn't think I had. But the mud told a different story. I checked my phone, scrolling through messages and call logs. There was nothing unusual. No missed calls, no strange messages, no photos from last night that could explain anything. My wallet was still in my pocket, all my money and cards untouched. My shoes were clean, no trace of mud on them. It was as if the night hadn't happened, as if I'd imagined it all. But the mud and bruises were real, and they terrified me. I needed answers, so I decided to go down to the lobby. I grabbed a towel, trying to wipe off the mud as best as I could, and threw on some clothes. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had I been attacked? Was someone playing a sick joke on me? Or was I losing my mind? When I reached the lobby, the receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain what I didn't understand myself. Did I leave my room last night? Go out somewhere? She looked puzzled. "No, sir. According to our records, you didn't leave the room at all. Is everything all right?" I stared at her, my heart pounding. "You're sure? Maybe there's a mistake?" She shook her head. "We have security cameras on every floor, sir. I can check for you, but I'm confident you stayed in your room all night. Is something wrong?" The thought of watching the footage sent a chill down my spine, but I had to know. "Yes, please check." She made a quick call, then led me to a small office behind the reception desk. A security guard was already there, pulling up the footage from the night before. I watched the screen, my breath caught in my throat, as the video showed me entering my room around 10 p.m., looking tired but fine. Then, nothing. The footage from the entire night showed me lying in bed, sleeping peacefully, the blankets barely moving. There was no sign of me leaving, no sign of anything unusual. I couldn't believe it. How could this be possible? I turned to the guard, desperate for an explanation. "This doesn't make sense. Look at me." I showed him the bruises, the dried mud still clinging to my skin. How could I get like this if I didn't leave the room? He looked uncomfortable, glancing at the receptionist before responding. "I don't know, sir. The footage doesn't lie. Maybe you hurt yourself in your sleep?" I shook my head, backing away from them. No, this isn't right. Something happened to me." "You're just not telling me." They exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. There was something they weren't saying, something they were keeping from me. I turned and left the office, my mind spinning. I needed to figure this out, but I didn't know where to start. Back in my room, I tried to think, to make sense of the madness. Was I losing my mind? Had I sleepwalked? But sleepwalking wouldn't explain the mud, the bruises. It didn't add up. I paced the room, feeling like a trapped animal, my paranoia growing with every passing second. As I walked past the door, I heard voices in the hallway. Two maids were talking in hushed tones, their words barely audible through the thick walls. But one phrase caught my attention and made me freeze. Another one, just like the last guest. My heart skipped a beat. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear more. Remember how they found him? Covered in mud and bruises, just like this guy. And then you know. The other maid shushed her quickly, but it was too late. I had heard enough. They were talking about me. But who was the last guest? And what had happened to him? I waited until the maids left, then hurried to the reception desk. I needed to know about the previous guest in my room. The receptionist wasn't there, so I tried to look at the guest book, but it was locked behind the counter. Frustrated, I returned to my room, my mind racing. There had to be something here, some clue I was missing. I searched the room frantically, pulling back the bed covers, opening drawers, even checking behind the furniture. I was about to give up when I noticed a loose floorboard near the window. My hands trembled as I pried it up, revealing a small space underneath. Inside, I found a dirty, crumpled piece of paper. My breath caught as I unfolded it and read the message scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They're lying to you. It happened to me too. Get out before it's too late." My blood ran cold. The previous guest had known something that got him killed, or worse. And now, it was happening to me. I didn't know what they wanted or why, but I knew I couldn't stay. I stuffed the note in my pocket, grabbed my things, and headed for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The reflection staring back at me looked wrong. The bruises, the mud, the fear in my eyes. It wasn't just me. It was like I was looking at a stranger, someone who had done terrible things. My hand froze on the doorknob, a terrifying thought creeping into my mind. What if I had done something last night? Something I couldn't remember? What if the mud and bruises weren't from someone else, but from me? I shook my head, trying to banish the thought, but it wouldn't leave. The note crumpled in my pocket felt like a burning brand, a warning I couldn't ignore. I had to get out, had to leave before I found out what I was really capable of. But as I stepped into the hallway, the sense of dread only grew. I wasn't sure who I was running from anymore, them or myself. I had been on the road for hours. My body ached from the long drive, and all I wanted was to collapse into a bed that wasn't in the back seat of my car. The hotel wasn't anything special, just a 3-star place off the highway. It was old, the kind of hotel that had seen better days, but it looked clean enough. The receptionist barely looked at me as he handed me the key, muttering something about the restaurant closing soon. When I got to my room, I noticed something odd. There was a door on the far side of the room, but it didn't seem to lead anywhere. It was sealed shut, covered in layers of dust. I figured it must have been an old connecting door that was boarded up when they divided the rooms. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just wanted to sleep. After a quick shower, I got into bed, hoping for a good night's rest. I was just drifting off when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated, wondering if I should ignore it. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. I opened the door to find a hotel employee standing there with a tray of food. Confused, I told him I hadn't ordered anything, but he insisted that the order was for my room. The tray had a dish of pasta, my favorite, which I hadn't mentioned to anyone at the hotel. It was a strange coincidence, but I was too tired to care. I sent the tray back, closed the door, and tried to shake off the weird feeling in my gut. The next morning, I woke up to find another delivery outside my door. This time, it was a single red rose, placed neatly on the floor with a note that read, "For your loss." My heart skipped a beat. My loss? What loss? I hadn't lost anyone, at least not recently. The thought crossed my mind that maybe it was meant for someone else, another guest who had experienced a tragedy. But still, the rose was right at my door, and the note didn't have a name on it. I tried to forget about it as I went about my day, but it stayed in the back of my mind. The rose, the note, it all felt wrong. When I returned to the hotel that evening, I felt a strange unease as I approached my room. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Later that night, there was another knock. This time, I opened the door to find nothing but an envelope on the floor. Inside was a photograph. I stared at it, my hands trembling. It was a picture of me, asleep in my hotel bed. I had no memory of anyone coming into the room, no sense of being disturbed. How could someone have taken this picture without me waking up? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That someone was leaving strange gifts outside my room? It sounded ridiculous even to me. Still, I went down to the front desk and spoke to the receptionist. He seemed bored, uninterested in my concerns. "We'll look into it," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe me. The next day, things got worse. Another knock, another delivery. This time, it was a small, worn-out toy, the kind I hadn't seen in years. It was a stuffed bear, just like the one I had as a child. But how could anyone know about that? The bear was long gone, lost or thrown away during one of our many moves when I was growing up. Panic started to set in. These weren't just random deliveries anymore. They were personal. Someone knew me, knew things about my past, things they shouldn't know. I didn't sleep that night, too afraid of what might happen while I was unconscious. I lay in bed, my heart pounding with every creak of the old building. When morning came, I felt like I was losing my mind. That evening, I tried to stay awake again, determined to catch whoever was behind this. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, deliberate. Then, a soft knock. I peered through the peephole and saw a figure standing there. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them, but when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I spent the next few hours pacing the room, my nerves on edge. I didn't know who was doing this or why, but I couldn't stay here another night. I started packing my bags, desperate to leave. As I was stuffing clothes into my suitcase, I found one last envelope, tucked into the side pocket. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a death certificate inside. My name was on it. The date of death was today. I stared at the paper, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake, a sick joke. But it felt real, too real. My body went cold, and I felt like I was suffocating. There was another knock at the door, softer this time, almost polite. I didn't move. I couldn't. Whoever or whatever was out there, I didn't want to face them, but I knew I had to leave. I grabbed my bags and ran, not looking back, not caring about anything except getting away. As I reached the lobby, I heard the knock again, even though I was far from my room. I burst through the doors and into the night, my heart racing, my mind numb. I don't remember how I got home, just that I drove as fast as I could. But the story doesn't end there. Every now and then, I still hear that knock. It comes when I least expect it, when I'm alone at night. And each time I'm reminded that no matter how far I run, I can never escape it. I live in a small apartment building, one of those old places with thin walls and creaky floors. It's nothing fancy, but it's close to work and the rent is cheap. Most nights it's quiet, which is something I like after a long day. I can just come home, lock the door, and forget about the world for a while. But that night, something was different. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m., and I was exhausted. The hallway was dim, like always, with just one flickering light at the far end. As I walked toward my door, I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet, actually. Usually, you can hear a TV or someone talking, but not that night. The silence felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I was almost at my door when I heard them. Two voices, low and angry. I couldn't see them at first, but I could tell they were close, maybe around the corner. The words were hard to make out at first, just muffled sounds. But then, as I got closer, I started to catch bits and pieces. "We need to get rid of the evidence," one of them said, his voice tense, almost shaking. "Shut up! Do you want someone to hear us?" The other voice snapped, full of panic. I froze. My hand was just inches from my doorknob, but I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. Evidence? What evidence? And what were they planning to do with it? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Were they talking about a crime? I didn't know much about my neighbors, just the usual nods in the hallway, maybe a quick hello. But now, hearing this, everything changed. My first thought was to get out of there, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I stood there, frozen, listening to them argue in hushed tones about something I wasn't supposed to know. "We can't let anyone find out," one of them said, his voice dropping even lower, almost a whisper. That was it for me. I didn't want to know anymore. I didn't want to be involved. I reached for my door, trying to be as quiet as possible. My hand was shaking so much, I almost dropped my keys. When I finally got the door open, I slipped inside and locked it behind me, leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. I kept telling myself it was none of my business, that I should just go to bed and forget about it. But how could I? What if they saw me? What if they knew I heard them? The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. Every creak of the floor, every sound from the hallway made me jump. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, everything felt different. I kept thinking about what I had overheard, replaying it in my head. When I left for work, I was careful, listening for any sign of them. The hallway was empty, but I felt like I was being watched. At work, I couldn't focus. I kept imagining them finding out that I knew something, and I'd be next on their list. Over the next few days, I started noticing things. One of the tenants, a quiet guy who lived a few doors down, suddenly wasn't around anymore. His mail piled up, and no one seemed to know where he went. Then there were the noises at night. Footsteps outside my door, whispers that stopped as soon as I got close. It was like the whole building had changed, like something dark had settled over it. My paranoia grew worse. I started checking the locks multiple times before going to bed, leaving the lights on and jumping at every little noise. I was sure they knew I overheard them. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that maybe it was just a heated argument about something trivial, but deep down, I knew better. Then, one morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was just a small piece of paper, but it felt like it weighed a ton. The words on it were simple: "Stay quiet, or else." My hands shook as I read it. They knew. They knew I heard them, and now they were warning me. I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to get out, but where could I go? What if they were watching me? I decided to leave that night, hoping I could just slip out unnoticed. I packed a small bag, trying to keep my nerves in check. As I headed to the door, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. I opened the door a crack, listening for any sound. The hallway was empty, but I didn't trust it. I stepped out, moving as quietly as I could toward the stairs. That's when they appeared. They were waiting for me. I saw them at the top of the stairs, their faces hidden in the shadows. My heart stopped. "You know too much," one of them said, his voice cold and hard. The other one took a step toward me, blocking my escape. "We can't let you leave." Panic took over. I backed away, looking for any way out. My mind raced, but I couldn't think straight. Then, out of nowhere, one of them hesitated. It was just for a second, but it was enough. I didn't think, I just ran. I pushed past them, not even feeling the impact as I slammed into them. I bolted down the stairs, not stopping to look back. I don't know how I made it out of that building. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible, and before I knew it, I was outside, gasping for air. I kept running, not caring where I was going, just wanting to get as far away as possible. Even now, as I write this, I don't know if I'm safe. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them there, ready to finish what they started. I don't know if they'll come after me, but one thing's for sure, I can't ever go back to that place. I checked into a hotel, but someone thought I was someone else. I was exhausted when I finally got to the hotel. It was a long trip, and all I wanted was to take a shower and sleep. The hotel looked ordinary, nothing special. The lobby was quiet with only a few people around. The staff at the front desk barely looked at me when they handed me my key. I thought it was strange, but I was too tired to care. My room was on the third floor. The elevator ride felt long, with that uncomfortable silence that made my skin crawl. When I reached my floor, the hallway was empty, and I noticed how dim the lights were. It didn't help that the carpet looked worn out and the walls were a faded yellow, like they hadn't been painted in years. There was something off about this place, but I shrugged it off, blaming my tired mind. I entered my room and locked the door behind me. The room was small, with just a bed, a desk, and a TV. Everything seemed fine, but that feeling, that uneasy feeling, stayed with me. I told myself it was just my nerves and went to the bathroom to freshen up. After a quick shower, I threw myself onto the bed, ready to pass out. But as I lay there, I heard something, a soft knock on the door. At first, I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. I got up and opened the door, expecting to see a staff member or maybe someone who had the wrong room. But it wasn't either of those things. A man stood there, his face serious, almost angry. He looked at me like he knew me, like he had been waiting for this moment. "You're finally here," he said, his voice low and tense. I blinked, confused. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The man didn't seem to hear me. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Don't play games with me. I know who you are." Panic started to rise in me. "I don't know you," I said, trying to shut the door, but he pushed against it, keeping it open. "You can't fool me," he hissed, his voice growing more intense. "You're not getting away this time." My heart raced. I pushed harder against the door, managing to close it and lock it before he could push his way in. I stumbled back, breathing heavily, my mind racing. Who was that man? Why did he think I was someone else? I checked the lock again, making sure it was secure. But even with the door locked, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I could still hear him outside, pacing, muttering to himself. It felt like hours before he finally left, but I didn't dare open the door to check. I sat on the bed, my mind spinning, trying to understand what had just happened. As the night went on, that man didn't leave me alone. I heard him in the hallway talking to someone, maybe himself. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the floor, every murmur of voices outside sent chills down my spine. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even lie down. All I could do was sit there, waiting, hoping he would leave me alone. I tried to call the front desk, but the phone in my room was dead. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal. I was trapped, alone, and terrified. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in on me. I thought about running, but where would I go? The exits were far away, and he could be waiting anywhere. At some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave. I grabbed my bag, threw on my shoes, and crept to the door. I listened for any sounds outside, but it was quiet. Too quiet. I slowly opened the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty, just as dim and creepy as before. I stepped out, trying to be as silent as possible. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way down the hallway towards the stairs. The elevator was too risky. I didn't want to get trapped in there if something went wrong. I reached the stairs and started down, each step echoing in the empty stairwell. But then I heard footsteps above me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, getting closer. I couldn't go back, so I hurried down the stairs, almost tripping in my haste. When I reached the ground floor, I bolted towards the exit. But when I got there, the door was locked. Panic surged through me. I banged on the door, hoping someone outside would hear me, but there was no one. Going somewhere? The voice came from behind me, cold and taunting. I turned around slowly, and there he was, the man from before, blocking my way. His face was twisted in anger, his eyes wild. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. "Please," I begged. "I'm not who you think I am." He just shook his head, stepping closer. "You can't fool me. I know who you are, and I'm going to make sure you pay for what you did." I reached into my pocket, pulling out my ID. I held it up, desperate. "Look, this is me. I'm not the person you're looking for." He glanced at it, but it didn't seem to change his mind. His eyes were still full of hate, and he kept coming closer. I was trapped, with no way out. I could barely think, my mind clouded with fear. But then, out of nowhere, someone shouted. A security guard came rushing towards us. The man stopped, hesitated, and then he ran. The guard chased after him, but he was fast, disappearing into the night. I stood there, shaking, barely able to breathe. The guard came back, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't even speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. They never found the man. I left the hotel as soon as I could, but the memory of that night still haunts me. Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever find me again, convinced I'm someone I'm not. I woke up to the soft hum of the hotel air conditioning, the heavy curtains barely letting any light into the room. It was a nice hotel, the kind that makes you feel safe, far from the chaos of travel. I should have felt relaxed, but something was wrong. There was a suitcase at the foot of my bed. It wasn't mine. At first, I thought maybe the cleaning staff had accidentally brought someone else's luggage into my room. It made sense, I guessed. But as I stared at it, something about the suitcase seemed off. I tried to remember last night, tried to piece together how this thing ended up in my room, but everything was hazy. I had a few drinks at the bar, but nothing that should have left my mind this foggy. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The suitcase was dark blue, scuffed at the corners, like it had seen its fair share of airports. But it was the stains that caught my eye, faint smudges of something dark, like old blood. My heart started to pound as I crouched down to get a closer look. The stains weren't fresh, but they were unmistakable. My fingers trembled as I reached for the zipper. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to leave it alone, to just call the front desk and let them deal with it. But curiosity won. I slowly pulled the zipper open, the sound loud in the quiet room. Inside, I found clothes, normal stuff, a few shirts, some jeans, and at the bottom, a passport. I picked it up with shaking hands, my eyes scanning the name and photo. The passport belonged to someone named Lucas Meyer. The photo showed a man in his early 30s, dark hair, clean shaven, nothing out of the ordinary. But then it hit me. I had seen this man before. Yesterday, when I checked in, he was in the lobby, talking to the receptionist. I remember because he smiled at me, just a brief, polite smile as he passed by. But something about his face stuck with me. And now, here I was, holding his passport. The fear that had been a quiet whisper in the back of my mind was now screaming. I needed to know more. Maybe it was all a mistake, just a mix-up, and he'd be looking for his luggage right now. I rushed down to the front desk, clutching the passport tightly. The receptionist smiled at me, the same one who checked me in. "Excuse me, but I think there's been a mix-up. I found this suitcase in my room, and it has this passport inside. I think it belongs to another guest," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The receptionist's smile faltered as she looked at the passport. Her face went pale, and she quickly glanced at the computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but the guest you're referring to checked out early this morning," she said, her voice shaky. "Checked out? But I just saw him yesterday. Are you sure?" My heart was racing. "Yes, he checked out around 5 a.m., she replied, avoiding my eyes. "But, there's no record of him leaving the premises." Her words hung in the air, thick with tension. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why would he leave his suitcase behind? Why were there bloodstains? And why did she look so nervous? I didn't like any of this. I needed answers. Maybe the hotel staff knew something they weren't telling me. My paranoia grew with every passing second. I felt eyes on me, like I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone lurking, but there was no one there. The hotel felt too quiet, too still, as if it was holding its breath. I went to the hotel manager, a tall man with a stern face, and explained everything, hoping he'd take it seriously. But he brushed me off, claiming it was probably just a mix-up and that there was nothing to worry about. His dismissive tone made my skin crawl. He wasn't listening, or maybe he didn't care. I couldn't tell which was worse. I felt isolated, trapped in this nightmare with no one to trust. The manager's cold indifference only deepened my fear. What if they were all in on something? What if they were trying to cover it up? I had to get out of there, but my mind was racing with doubts. What if I was overreacting? What if I was just paranoid? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened and that it wasn't over yet. Back in my room, I started packing frantically, my hands shaking as I shoved my things into my bag. I needed to leave, get as far away from this place as possible. As I zipped up my suitcase, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was outside my window, staring right at me. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to face the window, but whoever it was had disappeared before I could get a clear look. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my bag and rushed out the door, not even bothering to look back. But when I reached the lobby, the hotel staff was there, standing in my way, their eyes cold and unreadable. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" the manager asked, his voice eerily calm. I stammered something about an emergency, but he didn't move. The others closed in around me, their expressions blank. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized they weren't going to let me leave. But before they could stop me, I bolted, pushing past them and running out into the street. I didn't stop running until I was far away from the hotel, my chest burning from the effort. But even as I caught my breath, I knew it wasn't over. The terror I felt in that hotel room had followed me, creeping into my thoughts, refusing to let go. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a photograph of my hotel room, taken from the corner where the suitcase had been. There was also a note, just 4 words that sent chills down my spine. We will be watching. I'm not sure what they want from me or if they'll ever come after me again. But one thing is certain. I'll never forget the horror of that day, and I'll never feel truly safe again. I arrived at the hotel late, my body aching from hours of travel. The place was cheap, the kind where the front desk is just a small counter and the receptionist barely looks up when you check in. The lighting was dim, almost yellowish, making everything seem a little off. The faint smell of cleaning products hung in the air, not enough to hide something more unpleasant underneath. I didn't care much. I just needed a place to rest. The receptionist, a bored-looking man in his mid-30s, slid the key across the counter without even making eye contact. His indifference was almost comforting. It meant he didn't care to ask questions. I took the key and made my way to the room, thinking only of sleep. When I unlocked the door, the first thing I noticed was the mess. The bed was unmade, sheets crumpled in a heap, and there were personal items scattered around the room. A pair of shoes near the closet, a half-empty water bottle on the nightstand, and an open suitcase on the floor. My first thought was that housekeeping had forgotten to clean up. I stood in the doorway, debating whether to go back down to the front desk, but then I saw the blood. It wasn't a lot, just small stains on the sheets and a few drops on the carpet, but it was enough to make my heart race. Something about the room felt wrong. The suitcase looked like it had been packed in a hurry, clothes thrown in carelessly, as if someone left in a rush. A sense of urgency hung in the air, like I had just missed something terrible. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. I was too exhausted to deal with this. I kicked the suitcase under the bed and decided to crash on the chair by the window instead of the bed. Maybe I could deal with it in the morning. But as I sat there, my curiosity got the better of me. I started looking around, feeling like I was intruding on someone's secrets. The more I found, the worse I felt. There was a smashed phone in the trash can, pieces of glass and plastic sticking out like jagged teeth. On the wall near the door, there were strange marks, like someone had scratched or kicked it in a panic. My hands started to shake. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the front desk, but what would I say? That there was blood in the room and it looked like someone had run away? It sounded crazy, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But the fear kept creeping in, like shadows gathering in the corners of the room. Then I found the note. It was hidden in the suitcase, crumpled and stuffed between the clothes. The handwriting was shaky, almost desperate. It was a plea for help, scribbled in short, frantic sentences. "He's coming," it said. "I can't get out. If you find this, run." The last word was underlined so hard that the pen had torn through the paper. I froze. My mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened in this room. Whoever wrote that note was terrified, and they didn't make it out. And now I was here, sitting in the same room where they had been trapped. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, getting closer to my door. My breath caught in my throat as the sound stopped right outside. The doorknob rattled, as if someone was testing it, trying to see if it was locked. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I was paralyzed, torn between the urge to hide and the urge to run. The door began to creak open, moving slowly, like in a nightmare where you can't move fast enough. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront whoever was there? Should I stay quiet and hope they went away? My body refused to move, stuck in a horrible mix of fear and indecision. But when the door was fully open, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, silent except for the distant hum of the vending machine down the corridor. I stood up on shaky legs, my breath coming out in ragged gasps, and stepped into the hallway. It felt wrong, like I was stepping into someone else's nightmare. I looked left, then right. Nothing. But the sense of being watched was overwhelming, like eyes were on me from every shadowed corner. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave without knowing what had happened, who had been here before me. I turned back to the room, now feeling like I was looking at a crime scene instead of a place to rest. Everything felt different, more sinister. I realized that whatever had happened to the person before me, it wasn't over. The threat was still here, lurking just out of sight. I was in the same position they had been in, and now it was my turn to make a choice, to run or to stay and face whatever horror was waiting. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could escape. As I stood there, staring at the room, I understood something terrifying. I had walked right into a trap, and the real horror was just beginning. I don't know why I booked that hotel. I guess it was because I was tired, and it was cheap. The drive had been long, and I just wanted to rest. The place wasn't great. The paint on the walls was peeling, the bed looked old, and there was a musty smell that I couldn't ignore. But I was too tired to care. All I needed was sleep, so I told myself it didn't matter. But as I walked around the room, something felt off. Maybe it was the flickering light in the bathroom, or the way the curtains didn't quite close all the way. Or maybe it was just the silence. I felt like someone was watching me, but I couldn't see anyone. I laughed at myself, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I had been on the road for hours after all. I tossed my bag on the bed and started to unpack, trying to shake off the weird feeling. As I pulled out my clothes, something caught my eye. There was a small hole in the wall, just above the smoke detector. I squinted at it, leaning in closer. It looked like it had been drilled there. Curious, I climbed onto the chair and peered inside. My stomach dropped when I realized what it was. There was a tiny camera hidden in the smoke detector, pointing directly at the bed. Panic hit me like a wave. I jumped off the chair, my heart racing. I couldn't believe it. Who would put a camera in a hotel room? And why? I felt sick, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What if they had been watching me the whole time? What if they had seen everything? I had to calm down. Maybe it wasn't what I thought it was. Maybe it was just an old camera that no one used anymore. But as I looked around the room, I saw another one, this time hidden in the alarm clock on the nightstand. My hand shook as I picked it up. It was definitely a camera, and it was live. Someone was watching me, right now. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight. I needed to get out of there. But where would I go? I was alone, in a strange place, and now I knew someone was watching me. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I grabbed the phone to call the front desk, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. My heart pounded in my ears as I checked my cell phone. No signal. How could that be? I had full bars just a minute ago. It didn't make sense. Unless they had cut it off. Whoever was watching me, they had planned this. They knew I would try to call for help, and they made sure I couldn't. Fear took over. I had to get out of that room. I shoved my things back into my bag, moving as fast as I could. But as I reached for the door, I heard something. Footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, deliberate. Someone was outside. My hand froze on the doorknob. I couldn't move. I was too scared to breathe, let alone open the door. I didn't know what to do. Should I hide? Should I run? The footsteps stopped right outside my door, and I heard the faint sound of breathing. They were just standing there, waiting for me to make a move. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't let them catch me. I had to find another way out. That's when I remembered the service stairs. They were at the end of the hall, hidden behind a door that most guests didn't notice. I had seen them earlier on my way to the room. Maybe, just maybe, I could slip out that way without being seen. I crept toward the door, careful not to make any noise. The footsteps hadn't moved. Whoever was out there was still waiting. I held my breath as I turned the doorknob, praying it wouldn't creak. The door opened a crack, just enough for me to see into the hallway. It was empty. The person must have stepped back, just out of view. I slipped out of the room, keeping close to the wall. The hallway felt like it stretched on forever. Every step I took felt like it echoed off the walls, but I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't stop now. The door to the service stairs was just a few feet away. I could make it. I reached the door, my hand shaking as I grabbed the handle. I pulled it open, and the stale smell of the old stairwell hit me. It was dark, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I started down the stairs, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. My footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and I prayed no one would hear me. But as I reached the bottom, I realized I wasn't alone. The door at the bottom of the stairs was open, and a shadow moved in the dim light. They had been waiting for me. They knew I would try to escape, and they were ready. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't go back upstairs, and I couldn't move forward. I was trapped. The shadow stepped closer, and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. But there was none. In that moment, I knew I had only one choice. I turned and bolted back up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I didn't look back. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. They were chasing me, and I was running out of time. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs and sprinted down the hall, not caring if they heard me. I had to get out of there. But as I reached my room, I realized I was running straight into a trap. The door slammed shut behind me, and I heard the lock click. They had me. I don't remember much after that. It's all a blur of fear and darkness. But I know one thing for sure. I was never meant to leave that hotel. And if you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, trust your instincts. Get out while you still can. I checked into the hotel late, almost midnight. The lobby was empty, the air heavy with the scent of old carpet and stale air conditioning. The woman at the front desk barely looked up as she handed me my room key, her eyes tired and uninterested. I was exhausted after a long day of meetings and just wanted to sleep. The elevator doors slid open with a creak, and I stepped inside. The walls were mirrored, reflecting my tired face back at me from every angle. I pressed the button for the 7th floor and leaned back against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The elevator shuddered to a stop, and I was plunged into complete darkness. My heart skipped a beat, and I reached out instinctively, feeling the cold metal of the elevator walls around me. I told myself to stay calm, that it was just a power outage, something that happens in old buildings like this. But then, I heard a noise, a rustling sound, like someone shifting their weight. I wasn't alone. Hello? My voice came out shaky, weaker than I intended. There was a pause before I heard a reply. Hi. The voice was low, almost a whisper. It sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't noticed anyone else in the elevator when I got in, but then again, I was so tired, I might not have seen them in the corner. Didn't see you there, I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was racing. It's okay, the voice replied. There was something off about the way they spoke, like they were smiling, but I couldn't see their face in the dark. We stood there in silence for what felt like minutes, the air growing thicker with each passing second. I could feel my skin prickling, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The darkness was suffocating, and I wished for the lights to come back on, but the power stayed out. "You ever stay here before?" the stranger asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "No, first time," I replied quickly, eager for any conversation to distract me from the growing unease. The stranger chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the small space. "This place has history." "What do you mean?" I asked, curiosity mixing with my unease. "People say it's haunted, but it's not ghosts you should worry about." The stranger's tone was light, like they were talking about the weather, but the words sent a wave of fear through me. "What do you mean?" I repeated, my voice more strained. "There's been incidents," they continued, ignoring my question. "Disappearances, murders, things that never made it to the news. The hotel likes to keep its reputation clean, you know?" I didn't know how to respond. My mouth felt dry and I swallowed hard. This had to be a joke, some bored guest trying to mess with me during a power outage. But the way they spoke, the calmness in their voice, made me doubt that. "I don't believe in that kind of stuff," I said, hoping it would end the conversation. The stranger shifted again, and I could hear them moving closer, the sound of their footsteps barely audible on the carpeted floor. "Maybe you should. Some of the stories, they're not just stories. They happened right here, in this hotel. People who checked in but never checked out. Rooms sealed off, never used again because of what happened inside. Do you know what floor you're on?" The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. "Seventh." "Interesting," the stranger replied, their voice even closer now. "There was a man, stayed on the 7th floor a few years back, just like you, checking in late at night. He got into the elevator, and just like this, the power went out. When it came back on, he was gone. They never found him." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the fear gripping me tighter with every word they spoke. I wanted to get out, to run, but the elevator wasn't moving, and I was trapped with this stranger who knew too much about the dark history of this place. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The stranger didn't answer right away. When they finally spoke, their voice was even lower, almost a whisper in my ear. "Because you remind me of him." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The darkness seemed to press in on me from all sides, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Does it matter?" they replied, their tone indifferent. "You're not going anywhere." Panic surged through me. I started pressing the buttons on the elevator, all of them, over and over, hoping something would happen, anything to break the nightmare I found myself in. But nothing worked. The elevator stayed dark and silent. The stranger let out a soft laugh, and it sounded almost pitying. "It's no use. We're stuck here, you and me. You should get comfortable." I felt like I was losing my mind. My thoughts were racing, and I couldn't think straight. All I wanted was to get out, to escape this tiny, suffocating box with this person who seemed to know too much about the horrors that had happened in this place. Then, without warning, the elevator jolted, the lights flickering back on. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness, and I turned to see the stranger's face for the first time. But there was no one there. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, revealing the 7th floor hallway, empty and silent. I stumbled out, my legs shaky, and turned back to look inside the elevator. It was empty, as if I had imagined everything. I hurried to my room, my heart still racing, and locked the door behind me. But the fear didn't go away. I felt it deep in my bones, a sense of dread that wouldn't leave. As I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm down, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under the door. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was an old newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Man disappears in hotel elevator, never found." And there, in the photo below the headline, was the face of the stranger I had just spoken to. I dropped the paper, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, over and over. "You're not going anywhere." I never thought something like this would happen to me. I mean, you hear stories about strange things happening in hotels, but I always thought they were just that, stories. Now, I'm not so sure. I was in a small town for work, staying in a hotel that wasn't exactly luxurious, but was decent enough for a couple of nights. The kind of place where you expect the water pressure to be weak and the coffee to be lukewarm. It was late when I got back to my room. I remember being so tired that I didn't even bother with the TV, just brushed my teeth and fell into bed. I always lock the door, always. I'm paranoid like that, especially when I'm in a strange place. But that night, something woke me up. At first, I didn't know what it was. Maybe a sound, maybe just a feeling. I opened my eyes and everything was dark, except for a sliver of light coming from the hallway. That was when I noticed it. My door was wide open. I froze, my mind struggling to understand what I was seeing. I was sure I had locked it. I remember the feeling of the cold metal in my hand, the click of the lock turning. So why was it open? I sat up slowly, my heart starting to race as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. That's when I saw them, wet footprints leading from the door, across the carpet, and out into the hallway. Panic hit me hard. Someone had been in my room while I was sleeping. I felt a shiver go down my spine, a cold sweat breaking out all over my body. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no other explanation. I wasn't alone. My first thought was to get up, to close the door, to make sure it was locked this time. But I couldn't move. It was like my body was frozen in place. All I could do was sit there, staring at the footprints, my mind screaming at me to do something. Slowly, very slowly, I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt like they were made of jelly, and my hands were shaking so badly that I had to grip the edge of the bed to steady myself. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. My eyes followed the footprints. They led out into the hallway, disappearing into the shadows. I stopped at the doorway, peering out into the dimly lit corridor. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, just beyond the reach of the light, there was a figure. It was standing perfectly still, half hidden in the shadows. My heart nearly stopped. I couldn't see any details, just the outline of a person, standing there, watching me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even tell if they had seen me. I felt like I was trapped, with nowhere to go. My first instinct was to close the door, to lock it and call for help. But I couldn't take my eyes off that figure. For what felt like an eternity, we just stood there, me in the doorway, them at the end of the hall. Neither of us moved. The tension was unbearable. I kept telling myself to do something, to close the door, to run, to scream, but I couldn't. My body refused to listen. Then, just as I was about to retreat back into the room, the figure took a step forward. They moved slowly, almost casually, as if they weren't in any hurry. The light from the hallway caught their face as they stepped closer, and I could finally see them. It was just a man, an ordinary-looking man. He wasn't big or menacing, but there was something about the way he looked at me that made my blood run cold. His eyes were empty, almost like he was staring right through me. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. My throat was dry, and my mind was blank. All I could think was, why was he here? What did he want? He didn't look like a guest, and he certainly didn't look like hotel staff. There was something wrong, something off about him. He stopped a few feet away from me, still staring. I wanted to ask him what he was doing, why he had come into my room, but I couldn't find the words. He tilted his head slightly, as if he was studying me, trying to figure something out. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he said, "I've been watching you." The way he said it, so calm and matter-of-fact, sent a wave of terror through me. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Watching me? How long? Why? What did he want? But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. He took another step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I could see the faintest hint of a smile on his lips, and it made my skin crawl. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Finally, something inside me snapped. I turned and slammed the door shut, my hands shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the lock to turn. I stumbled back to the bed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I grabbed my phone and dialed the front desk, but I could barely get the words out. Someone was in my room, I managed to say. The person at the front desk sounded concerned, but they didn't seem to grasp the urgency of the situation. They said they would send someone up to check, but I knew that by the time they got there, he would be gone. And he was. When the hotel staff arrived, the hallway was empty. No sign of the man, no wet footprints. It was like he had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. I know he was real, and I know he'll be back. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. But it never did. When morning finally came, I packed my bags and left the hotel as fast as I could. I didn't even bother to check out. I don't know who that man was or why he was watching me, but I can't stop thinking about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face, that empty stare, that faint smile, and I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. I was driving through a remote town late at night, exhausted from the road. The rain had been relentless for hours, making the highway hard to see, so when I saw the small hotel sign glowing in the distance, it felt like a blessing. I pulled into the gravel lot, my tires crunching loudly in the quiet of the night. The hotel was old with a quaint charm, the kind of place that felt welcoming after a long journey. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. She looked about my age, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Her friendliness was a relief after the long hours of solitude on the road. "Rough night, huh?" she asked, noticing my tired eyes. I nodded, thankful someone understood. "We have a nice room available, but if you're interested, I could upgrade you to a suite. It's much nicer, with a great view and more space to relax." "No extra charge," she offered, her tone inviting. I was too tired to think twice about it. A better room sounded perfect. I agreed, and she handed me a key, her smile widening. "You'll love it," she assured me. The room was everything she promised, spacious, with a large bed, cozy furniture, and a wide window overlooking the dark, rainy town below. It was almost too perfect, but as I settled in, small things started to feel off. The air had a strange smell, faint but unpleasant, like something old and rotting beneath the surface. A door at the far end of the room was locked, which seemed strange, but I was too tired to care. I convinced myself it was just a storage closet or something similar and focused on getting some rest. But rest didn't come easy. The room was too quiet, the kind of silence that isn't really silent. I started hearing noises. At first, it was just faint whispers, like someone was talking far away. Then I heard soft footsteps and a tapping sound that seemed to come from the locked door. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the old building settling in the night. When the noises didn't stop, I called the front desk. The receptionist's voice was calm, almost too calm. She reassured me that it was nothing to worry about, probably just the building. "If it gets worse, I'll send someone up," she said, but nobody ever came. I tried to sleep, but the whispers grew louder, the footsteps closer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched. The tapping on the locked door became more persistent, like someone was trying to get my attention. I had to know what was behind that door. My heart pounded as I approached it, my hand trembling as I turned the knob. To my surprise, it wasn't locked anymore. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow, dimly lit hallway that shouldn't have been there. The hallway was cold, much colder than the room I had just left. A foul smell hit me, stronger now, almost choking. I forced myself to walk down the hallway, each step echoing in the darkness. At the end, I found a small dark room. Inside, there were piles of belongings, clothes, bags, even shoes, all scattered like someone had dumped them in a hurry. But what caught my eye were the personal items, things like wallets, passports, and pictures of people who must have stayed in this hotel before me. It hit me all at once. This wasn't an upgrade. This was a setup. The people who stayed in this room before me, they never left. Panic surged through me. I had to get out. I turned to leave, but the hallway was suddenly longer, darker. I ran back to the main room, hoping to escape, but when I reached the door, it was locked from the outside. I was trapped. The whispers were louder now, filling the room with a terrible droning noise. And then I saw her, the receptionist, standing at the end of the hallway, her smile gone, replaced by something cold and sinister. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice no longer friendly. It was a question that wasn't really a question. She knew I had nowhere to go. Desperate, I ran to the window and threw it open. The rain poured in, drenching me instantly, but I didn't care. I climbed out, cutting my arm on the glass, and dropped to the ground below. The pain was sharp, but it didn't matter. I ran, slipping on the wet pavement, not stopping until I was far away from that cursed hotel. I don't remember how long I ran before I found help. I must have looked insane when I stumbled into the nearest town, bleeding and soaking wet. I told the police everything, every detail, but when they took me back to the hotel, it was empty, abandoned. The building looked like it hadn't been used in years. There was no receptionist, no record of my stay, nothing. They didn't believe me. They thought I was just another crazy traveler who got lost in the rain. But I know what I saw, what I heard. I know that hotel was real, and that something evil happened there. Now, every time I pass through a small town, I look for that sign, for that hotel. I never want to see it again, but I know it's out there, waiting for the next traveler to offer its upgrade. I recently had an experience that I need to share. I still can't wrap my head around it, and I don't expect you to believe me. Honestly, I'm not sure if I believe it myself, but it happened. I need to get it out there, just in case someone else goes through the same thing. I was on a business trip, staying at a small hotel in a city I'd never been to before. It was nothing special, just one of those places you pick because it's cheap and close to where you need to be. The kind of place that looks fine at first but starts feeling off after a while. The moment I stepped into the lobby, something felt wrong. The lights were too dim, the furniture too old. The receptionist barely looked up as she handed me my key. She seemed almost bored? I don't know, like she didn't care about anything. It didn't help that the place was nearly empty. I only saw a few other guests, and they were all keeping to themselves. But it was late, and I was tired. I just wanted to get to my room, shower, and sleep. The room itself was okay, clean, but with a stale smell like it hadn't been aired out in a long time. I tried to ignore it. I was too tired to care. I was about to drift off when I heard it, the sound of something sliding under my door. I turned on the light, groggy and annoyed, thinking it was some kind of hotel flyer or maybe my bill. But it wasn't. It was a piece of paper, folded in half. No envelope, no name, just a plain piece of paper with something written on it. Leave now. The handwriting was shaky, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry or scared. I stared at it, confused. Was this a joke? Maybe some weird prank? I considered calling the front desk, but what would I say? Instead, I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. I tried to go back to sleep, but it took a long time. The message kept playing in my head. Leave now. Why? The next morning, everything seemed normal. The sun was shining and people were moving about like nothing was wrong. I almost convinced myself that it was just a dumb prank. But that evening, when I got back from my meetings, there was another note. It's not safe. Get out. My heart started racing. This time, I took the note straight to the front desk. The receptionist barely glanced at it before saying it was probably a mistake, that maybe someone slipped it under the wrong door. Her tone was flat, uninterested, like she was just going through the motions. I asked if anyone else had complained about strange notes. She just shrugged and said no. Then she smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It felt wrong, like she was hiding something. But what? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to leave right then, but another part of me didn't want to look like a fool running away because of a couple of notes. So I stayed. I told myself it was nothing, just someone messing with me. But that night I barely slept. Every little noise made me jump. Every shadow made my heart pound. The notes kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. You don't have much time. They're coming. Please leave. I was losing it. I didn't know who to trust. The hotel staff acted like nothing was wrong, like they didn't even notice how strange everything was. And the other guests? They were no help. They kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact, like they didn't want to be involved. One night, I was walking back to my room when I noticed a man standing in the hallway. He was just standing there, staring at me. I tried to ignore him, but as I passed by, he leaned in close and whispered, "You should listen to the notes." I froze. Before I could respond, he walked away, disappearing around the corner. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my door. Inside, there was another note waiting for me. This one was different. It didn't just tell me to leave. It gave me a time. Midnight. Don't stay. I checked the clock. It was already close to midnight. My mind was racing. Should I go? But where? I didn't know this city, didn't have anywhere else to stay. I grabbed my bag and started packing, my hands moving on autopilot. Then I heard it. A sound outside my door. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, frozen, listening as the footsteps got closer. They stopped right outside my door. I could see the shadow of someone standing there, not moving, just waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked open the door, ready to confront whoever it was, but no one was there. The hallway was empty. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I turned to go back inside, and that's when I saw it. Someone, or something, was standing at the end of the hallway, just watching me. I didn't wait to find out who or what it was. I ran. I didn't care where I was going, just away from that place. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air. I kept running until I found a taxi and told the driver to take me to the nearest hotel, any hotel. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the notes, the footsteps, the figure in the hallway. Who sent the notes? What was going to happen at midnight? I'll never know. But I'm sure of one thing. Something was wrong in that hotel, something dangerous. I tried telling people what happened, but no one believed me. They said I was imagining things, that I must have been stressed or tired. Maybe they're right. But I can't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something or someone was after me. I haven't been able to stay in a hotel since. Every time I think about checking in somewhere, I remember those notes, and I can't do it. I don't know if I ever will again. All I know is that I got out, and I'm never going back. When I checked into the hotel, it seemed like any other quiet, old-fashioned place. The lobby had that old wood smell, mixed with something like dust, as if the building had been standing there forever. I had booked this place on a whim, an attempt to escape the city for a weekend and get some peace. The front desk clerk smiled as she handed me my key, her smile a little too wide, a little too forced. But I was tired, so I didn't think much of it. Besides, these small towns often had their own strange ways. The lobby was empty except for a couple of men talking quietly in a corner. Their words floated over to me as I waited for the elevator, but I wasn't really listening. That is, until one of them mentioned a hunt happening tonight. I glanced over, trying to make sense of it. They laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that made you want to join in. Then, one of them said something about a new guest. My heart skipped, but I shook it off. They were probably talking about some game or event. Maybe hunting was common around here. Still, something about the way they spoke made me uneasy. I reached my room and tried to brush off the feeling. The room was small but clean, with old-fashioned furniture that matched the rest of the hotel. I dropped my bag on the bed and decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The town was quiet, almost deserted, and the cool air felt good on my skin. But as the day went on, the unease I felt didn't go away. It grew. It started with the hotel staff. Whenever I passed them in the hallway, they would look at me a second too long, their eyes following me as I walked by. It wasn't friendly. It was like they were studying me. Then there were the other guests. They seemed normal at first, but I started noticing the way they whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't looking. Their smiles were polite but strange, like they knew something I didn't. At dinner, the waitress placed my plate in front of me and said, "Hope you're ready for a good chase tonight." She winked and walked away before I could ask what she meant. I pushed the food around on my plate, my appetite gone. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all, but nothing clicked. I kept telling myself I was overthinking. I had to be. But the tension in my chest was growing, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't until later that night, when I was back in my room, that everything clicked. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm down, when it hit me. The hunt wasn't some game. It was real, and I was the target. The realization slammed into me like a punch to the gut, and I shot out of bed, my heart pounding in my ears. I rushed to the door, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The lock had been tampered with from the outside. Panic took over. I ran to the window, but I was too high up. There was no way to get down without breaking something. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out what to do. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, there wasn't. The hotel was in the middle of nowhere. I tried to think, to come up with a plan. Maybe I could break the window and use the sheets to climb down. But then I heard it. A sound outside the door. A shuffle, like someone trying to be quiet. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay calm. The door handle jiggled, and then I heard it unlock. I didn't wait to see who was coming in. I bolted for the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the lock. I backed away, my eyes on the door, waiting for it to burst open. Then, the voices started. They were low, but I could hear them clearly through the thin walls. "She's in there," one of them said, amused. "She knows." Another chuckle, like this was all a game. For them, it probably was. But for me, it was life or death. I didn't have much time. I looked around the bathroom, trying to find something, anything that could help me. My eyes landed on the vent above the toilet. It was small, but maybe, just maybe, I could fit through it. I climbed onto the toilet, pushing the vent cover aside. The space was narrow, the metal cold against my skin, but I had no choice. I pulled myself up, wincing as the edges cut into my hands. I managed to squeeze into the vent just as the bathroom door burst open. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. The vent was dark, and I couldn't see where it led, but it didn't matter. I crawled forward, trying to be as quiet as possible. I could hear them below me, searching the bathroom, their footsteps heavy. I didn't know how long I crawled. Time seemed to stretch, each second feeling like an hour. My muscles ached and the air was thin, but I kept moving. I had to get out. I had to survive. Finally, I saw a dim light ahead. I crawled faster, hope flaring in my chest. I reached the end of the vent and kicked out the cover. It fell with a clang, but I didn't care. I climbed out, landing in a room that looked like some kind of storage space. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The room was filled with shelves, and on those shelves were things, personal items, clothes, bags. And then I saw them, the bodies. They were hidden behind the shelves, propped up like dolls. My breath caught in my throat. These were the other guests, the ones who hadn't made it. Panic surged through me again, but this time it was mixed with a cold, hard realization. This was it. This was where they brought the bodies after the hunt. I had stumbled right into their trap. I turned to run, but the door behind me opened and I was caught in the light from the hallway. And that's where my memory stops. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe I got away, or maybe I didn't. I guess that's for you to decide.